excited to have Rob McNealy, CEO, founder of TUSC, the Universal Settlement Coin, on the show today. Rob, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Jason. It's nice talking with you, as always.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was lucky enough, had the privilege of being a guest on your podcast. Glad I'm able to return the favor and distribute out our conversations to my audience as well here. Should be a lot of fun, particularly as the world has changed drastically since our last published chat.
Absolutely. And it seems like it's changing a lot. And that's why I think, interviews like this are kind of timely, because things are changing dramatically, and it's not just in crypto, it's changing in a lot of places. So I think it's good to kind of recalibrate on a regular basis now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. On the marketing side, we're seeing groups create a new strategy, a new plan weekly at this point because of how rapidly the landscape, the dynamics are mixing up. So I definitely want to get into that with you here today, but figured we'd start with you, with your history, with your story, with who you are and everything you've done to get here today.
Wow, that's a loaded question. We could spend about 3 hours on that. So brief background, I am a serial entrepreneur. I am not a developer, though I do have an undergrad from, I'm not going to say the year, I'm just saying I'm old. I got gray hair now. But I studied geography and marketing in undergrad from Central Michigan University back in the 90s. And then I later got an MBA from Colorado State. And it's funny because right after I got my normal education out, I actually became an entrepreneur. And then I tell people that I've had to forget about, half of what I learned in business school to actually run a small business. And so I've been a serial entrepreneur most of my adult life, but I became a successful, or I would say a self-sufficient entrepreneur, meaning that I make a living. I've been making a living as an entrepreneur since about 2005. Before then, I had lots of startup projects, and I would call them hobby businesses or just like consulting gigs, but it was never enough that I had, made enough money to make a living off of, or thought that I could seriously make a living off of. But I've been making a living as an entrepreneur for about 15 years now, but I've been an entrepreneur longer than that. And I've had one exit, never lost anybody else's money, never done a capital formation process in a formal way. I've never taken VC money from anybody, and I've never done a bankruptcy. And then pretty much everything I've tried to do since about 2012 has been profitable. Doesn't mean they've all made a lot of money, but it seems like I figured something out with all the mistakes I made before then to be successful. And then when we come fast forward to where we are right now, we started TUSC, which stands for the Universal Settlement Coin. We originally were a token called OCC. We did rebrand later on. And then we started that literally on New Year's Day of 2018. And then we launched a token. We gave it away for free via faucet. So we weren't an illegal security under US law. With about 6 months of learning everything through that process that we did about the crypto world, we decided that it would make sense at that point, probably third quarter of 2018, that maybe we needed to launch our own blockchain instead of being a token on someone else's blockchain. And through that process, we did a rebrand from OCC to TUSC. We went through a pretty deep dive on market segmentation with the focus in trying to answer the question, how do we get mass adoption with crypto? Because what we saw in the landscape even till today is there's just no mass adoption happening in crypto. And then I think we spent about 6 months trying to figure out, how do you create a decentralized project? But how do you market a decentralized project like a startup might? And so we answered and tried to address some of those questions through a lot of thoughtfulness. And then in October 2019, last October, we did our token swap. So we built a dApp, converted OCC tokens over to TUSC, and then we launched the blockchain to the public right around New Year's of 2019, so 2020. So we are now a full-blown blockchain. We've been live and operational since New Year's, so it's 6 months now. And that's our focus right now, is what we're doing is trying to get mass adoption. With TUSC, our focus is trying to go out and get mass adoption by focusing on basically several industries, primarily one industry, but we're going after industries that have what we call a recognized problem with payments. And if you look at out there, a lot of these crypto projects that are out there, especially with the influencers, you'll hear someone hassling their barista or hassling an Uber driver, hassling grandma about Bitcoin. And all they're doing is creating stress. We don't think that's a good way to market a project because those people in the United States don't really have a problem that crypto solves. Crypto, in fact, probably creates more problems and hassles and stress for those people because of the accounting and the taxes and the learning curve and all those things. And we said that's just a waste of time, and you're pissing off everybody when you do that. So with TUSC, we said we're going to limit where we kind of market our energies and efforts with the project to industries that have a recognized payments problem. Let's start there. And then on top of that, we have a strategy on how do we get adoption. So, and that's a long-term strategy. This is going to take years. But we said, we're trying to focus on what we call that last mile of crypto adoption. And so, and what we mean by that is, how do you get people wanting to pay for things in crypto? How do you incentivize that? What incentive structures do you put out there to make the end user want to use crypto when Visa's easier, for instance? So a lot of the projects out there that are more mature than TUSC, they have payment gateways maybe on thousands of websites through like Coin Payments and some of these other third-party payment providers. So they have these, WebCart plugins, and they're on point-of-sale systems, but yet that's bringing the horse to water, right? But unfortunately, they're not forcing the horse to drink the water. And so what we said is because they don't have a plan, and no one really talks about this plan either, as far as most of the projects out there, is how do you get that horse to drink the water? How do you get end users to use your crypto for something when their Visa is easier? And,
yes.
And we think we got a way to do that. And that's what we're focusing on with TUSC.
I love it. And particularly that analogy where you're saying there's other options out there. I don't necessarily want to promote those, but there's other payment processing vehicles via crypto that exist. But what you're saying is they are missing the mark in terms of adoption. And TUSC is designed to solve those problems. It's fast. There's multiple payment processing gateways. And there is a extreme advantage to retailers with your processing percentage in comparison to more traditional assets there, traditional technologies. Do you want to speak about that a little further? Is there more that you could talk about for why payment processing is preferable for TUSC and how you look to attract the users, how you look to get horses to water in that scenario?
Sure. So that's a lot to unpack, but yeah. So before we ever started building TUSC, we did what an entrepreneur would do more than a developer. So I think part of the problem with a lot of crypto projects is that they're developer-led projects and they're engineer-led projects. And engineers look at things a little differently than, say, an entrepreneur would. As an entrepreneur, I'm not some super rich guy. I haven't made my millions and billions of dollars yet, but I know enough of what I've learned along the way over the last 20 years is that, if I'm going to do a startup now, I am not generally going to do a startup unless I have a customer in mind first, that I can help them or solve their problem with my business. And so I tend to now, when I look at, opportunities, I look at it from the point of view is who's the customer first, and then build the company to solve their problem. And we kind of took that approach, and there is no company for TUSC now. I mean, I'm a co-founder. I was the CEO when we were a token, but when we launched our blockchain and did our swap, we got rid of the company. There's no company now. I don't own it. And in fact, we have this thing called on-chain governance with TUSC. So I don't even have power to make decisions unilaterally anymore. And I can tell you as an entrepreneur, that was a tough thing for me to swallow because I like to control things. So one of the things we did, we are focused on niche industries that have a recognized problem. And so what we started doing is talking to industry people first before we ever started coding the blockchain and before we even decided which blockchain, for instance, to fork. And I can tell you, we did a lot of planning. It took us about 6 months to figure out how we're going to govern it, because we're doing some unique things with on-chain governance and marketing and things of that nature. And we took our time, and I started knocking on doors, cold calling literal manufacturers, retailers, and in an industry I thought would be a good place to start, and started asking about their problems. And that's where we started. And what we found is, we learned a lot through that process. And then we built the blockchain around meeting their problems. So for instance, we're looking at as one of our first industries, the lawful regulated, U.S. gun industry. And we looked at that for a couple of reasons. In the United States right now, there's about 7 industries that we would have identified that have a recognized problem with payments. Now, and I understand activists out there, they'll say, well, inflation, Federal Reserve, central banking, I get all that. I understand the economics, but most people in the world don't see those problems or see those things as problems. They don't even understand those things. Those are pretty deep dive economics issues. But I'm talking about industries that have a recognized problem, meaning that they can't use a third-party payment option at all, or they have a hard time getting a bank account. And there's several industries in the United States that fit in that kind of mold. And we think that's where you need to marketing crypto as a product to. Those industries are things like gambling, pornography, prostitution, cannabis, CBD oil, refugees and immigrants, remittances, payday lenders and pawn shops, and guns. Now, it's interesting, and I understand all of those industries are distasteful to somebody, depending on your own political beliefs and maybe where you live in the country. So we said, look, we feel that if you're trying to get someone to, adopt crypto, you got to go with people that have a problem, that they know they have a problem. And all those industries have a problem. But only one of those industries is a $50 billion industry. And only one of those industries is constitutionally protected in the United States. And so even like cannabis is a big multi-billion-dollar industry, but cannabis, for instance, everybody asks us, why don't you just go to cannabis because they don't like guns or whatever? And we said, well, the problem is cannabis, for instance, is that under federal law, they're still illegal. And absolutely targeting and looking like you're trying to support an illegal drug trafficking business, you can be hammered by the feds for that. But here's the thing with guns, and we decided to focus at least our initial marketing efforts on guns. And we did that for a couple of reasons. And why we think it's important to focus on one. Look at like some successful companies like, most of the people listening here probably are not old enough to remember. Amazon started out as a bookstore, an online bookstore. That's all they did. They only did books. They only talked about books. They did that for 5 or 6 years. And they only focused on books, and they got traction. They were disruptive, and then they spread to other industries. Now, we didn't name TUSC the assault rifle crypto, right? We didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves. We view long-term, we're going to go into as many industries as possible, but we want to focus on one industry that has a recognized problem first. We want to focus on an industry that's really big and one that's constitutionally protected in the United States. So we decided to focus a lot of our energy into guns. Once we decided on that industry, we then went to that industry and started talking to them first. We didn't just go build a blockchain and say, now gun people use this blockchain. We went and started talking to manufacturers and found out a couple things. One, they have a hard time getting a bank account. You think a business like, I want to get the 2% or 1.5% on just merchant process. They can't even get a checking account very easily, believe it or not. That's for politics, not because of legal reasons. And so we adopted the motto, payments, not politics, for top. Because of that, because we're not here to pick and choose politics, right? I'm not a cannabis user. I'd have no problem with a cannabis company wanting to use TUSC, but we're not going to focus our energy there for the aforementioned potential legal reasons. Even though we're a decentralized project, doesn't mean you can't get the government after you for some reason or not. So then we started doing, I call it, requirements gathering. We started talking to potential end users. We learned that the gun industry has they have a big payments problem. Even if they can get a merchant processing, they're paying a huge amount of fees. They have a huge monthly maintenance fee that they typically have to pay just to have a merchant account. They struggle getting bank accounts, but they have a big chargeback problem, especially the custom gun world has a big payments problem or a chargeback problem because it takes a long time for someone to build a custom gun. And these aren't cheap guns. These might be anywhere from 5 to 20 grand if you have a custom gun built, right? So it takes maybe 6 months or a year to make one. And we're talking lawful gun retailers that are heavily regulated. We're not talking about peer-to-peer on the street. We're talking gun stores, right, that have huge amount of paperwork and regulations and chain of custody. So we're not looking at supporting criminal elements or anything like that. But they have a big chargeback issue. They have a big cost of doing business issue, and they're barred from any third-party payment option like PayPal or Square or Stripe or Venmo, Cash App. None of them, because of terms of service, will allow a gun retailer to use their services. So we decided, and we talked to the gun retailers. They liked what we were talking about when we say, hey, we're going to come so low. And based on the input that we got from the industry, we then decided to start figuring out how to build the blockchain that solved their problem. So we also said adoption is going to be a problem. The gun space is there's a lot of low tech people in the gun space. Okay, some of those stereotypes about gun owners are right, some are not. So we said, okay, one of the things that we did that was a little different is we decided we had to have fast block times and confirmation times. So we decided that drove the decision on which type of blockchain to build. So we went with a delegated proof of stake blockchain. Our block times are 3 seconds, and our average confirmation time are about 2.5 seconds. So that means that we're basically fast enough for retail Visa transactions. We're very similar to speed for confirmation times out of the gate, which means that we're acceptable for a retail environment. No one's going to wait in line. We talk to people. No one's going to wait in line for a 10-minute block time blockchain that might take 2 hours because of mempool congestion to confirm a transaction. Grandma's not going to wait in line. No one's going to wait in line for that. Right. So we said, one, we got to make a product that makes sense and has to be as close to a user experience as possible to make that adoption easier. So we can't make it complicated with learning curve. Another thing we made that was a little different with typical crypto blockchains out there, and I don't know, and I know why they did it, but ultimately, who pays the fees is reversed in crypto than it is in typical credit cards. So in a typical credit card transaction, it's usually the seller pays the transaction fee, but then crypto reversed that, the sender pays that. So we created a 2-tier system. So if you're just transferring TUSC from one wallet to another, the sender does pay the fee, and it's super tiny. It's a couple TUSC. It doesn't cost anything really. It's next to free right now based on our price point. But then when we create a different function in the blockchain for a sale, which triggers a 0.5% transaction fee, but the seller pays that fee, which is different than what any other crypto does. But we wanted it to be very similar to a normal retail transaction experience.
Around 3% though.
3 seconds, less than 3 seconds.
But meaning a normal, credit card type of transaction in comparison would be more around 3%. And just in comparison, if they wanted to go after, let's say a Bitcoin payment, what would the speed time, like what would you anticipate that in comparison to TUSC?
Well, a normal Bitcoin, the minimum time of Bitcoin transaction is going to be 10 minutes because that's the block time. But because of congestion and because of the mempool congestion, how much you want to pay for that transaction fee, it can be hours depending, and sometimes 24 hours depending on how much the transaction is. So that's another thing that we wanted to change, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Is how much does it cost to transact? So if you transact with a credit card, sometimes the fees are crazy, but what the fee is going to be for every sale. You know that if you have a merchant processing deal for 3%, you're going to have to pay 3% on every transaction deal. Well, with a lot of cryptos, you don't know what's going to cost. And whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum, because they have congestion pricing, right? And so that fee fluctuates. And we felt that's hard. And I used to own a retail store at one point, right? One of my businesses, I owned a store, and I set up my own point of sale. So I know a lot about this, and that I can't even get my head around that. And it sounds like something a developer would do who's never run a cash register. I've run a cash register, MBA running a cash register at one point in my life. And I have no problem with that because I love talking to my customers at the time. But from a business standpoint, it's hard to plan your cash flows when you don't know how much it's going to cost you to make a sale every time. consistently. So from a cash flow standpoint and a planning standpoint, that's hard. We said, look, we're going to just throw in a 0.5% transaction fee. It's far superior than any credit card processing fee. It's just high enough to make it worthwhile for the network to be supported. And then we can also, the way we created our marketing partner function within the blockchain, it also helps funnel back into some charity funds. It also helps that transaction fee pays for the servers, the nodes that people are running to operate the network, and it actually pays for the marketing partner to help grow the network. So we wanted to have a set percentage fee that was flat that everybody can know and plan for. So that's what some of the things we did a little differently than a lot of other blockchains to meet a problem is we wanted to be really easy for them to use and kind of learn how to use it. And then the other thing we did that's really different than any other blockchain out there is and I mentioned before, we created this thing called the marketing partner. And I said earlier, one of those problems that I see out there is that there's a lot of problems with marketing for crypto projects, especially decentralized projects run by developers who may not really like sales and marketing and business development functions. And so we said, we want to be decentralized because we wanted that's important to be a neutral project, to have no one controlling it, no central authority or head to cut off. That helps with censorship resistance and things like that. But we said, but I feel as an entrepreneur, which kind of like you, I really value marketing and sales and those functions, is how do you incorporate the best efficient practices of marketing and executing a marketing plan as a decentralized project? Right. And that was tough. And we spent some time looking at all the other projects out there. Some projects have network effect and they're just the first, like Bitcoin. So no one cares about Bitcoin. Everybody knows who Bitcoin is, right? You don't need a marketing team for Bitcoin, maybe. But there isn't one. There's no way to fund marketing Bitcoin from Bitcoin, but it's also the first and it's an anomaly, right? So a smaller project probably does need to do some marketing, especially if there's competition in whatever they're trying to do. So we said, okay, how do you market a decentralized project? And so efficiently. So we created a thing called the marketing partner, which is a term limited and elected vendor. The network elects the committee. The committee then elects the marketing partner. The marketing partner gets a small sliver automatically of the block rewards coming into the network, and its job is to grow TUSC like a startup would. However, the marketing partner has no say over governance. It's not allowed to vote on anything. And it has to provide a report to the network about what it's doing with its activities. And what we're finding so far, it seems to be working. It's efficient. So, and as we grow, the marketing partner will have a more prominent role in working with either outside marketing firms or what have you to grow TUSC like a startup. The beauty of that is, though, that is a for-profit business or could be a for-profit business, and that company could be fired at any time if they're not performing that job well. And we look at it kind of like, say you're a homeowners association, and the homeowners association is elected by the homeowners, and then it hires and oversees maybe the parks contractor or the sidewalk contractor or the maintenance company that kind of runs the homeowners association. And that's kind of how we view the marketing partner with TUSC. And I don't know of any other project that is set up to grow that way. So I think those are kind of the things that we decided as we're coming into TUSC and building this out, how we think we've at least structured a strong foundation to then launch and propel us into getting mass adoption.
Amazing to hear about everything in terms of the architecture. Obviously the committee factor, being a marketing agency, is something we dove into right away after first meeting at conferences and having an understanding of that role. I love how it's elected. Did some more due diligence on everything that's involved and how that creates that democratization of the actual system itself. But I want to go back. I want to talk about more of those 7 industries. I want to talk more about payments over politics, which is something I believe a lot of businesses, a lot of investors can relate with. I can tell you as a marketing agency, it's something we've had to subscribe to. And this dates back to my earlier ad tech days where I would work on advertising campaigns for both sides of the two-party system. So I couldn't just, hop on to discovery calls or campaign kickoffs talking about any one side politics as much as their marketing initiatives and hitting those milestones and hitting those goals, which has certainly continued for me my team as an extension of that as we focus on emerging verticals. It's how we fell into investor acquisition campaigns and equity crowdfunding portals, which later led us to cryptocurrency projects, then into blockchain user acquisition, blockchain and cryptocurrency as a whole. And I could tell you, to relate with marketing activations, is blocked. We have to be very specific in terms of how we launch these campaigns, because if we just tried to, take what was on the offering page and move it on to an advertisement, we're systematically going to get denied. Now, we've worked with our Facebook advertising reps and other platforms to figure out compliant ways to do so, and have done similar types of exercises in other of those 7 communities. And there's a way to do it. But I get to hear about the struggles. I get to hear about how difficult it is to open up a CBD bank account, even more so than a cannabis bank account here in California, which is funny when you weigh out the federal rules around hemp and cannabis and a lot of the unnecessary hoops that they have to go through. So very familiar with that, even with bank accounts getting shut down. And I could tell you, when we're running their advertising campaigns, avoiding different types of trigger words, being able to focus on the function versus something that could be looked at as against the rules and be issued with an immediate disapproval, ad account shutdown, personal social account removal as a whole. So we have to be very careful about that and how it's set up. I look at the way some of those verticals are promoted through a larger offering. I know, I could tell you a lot of accounts are getting shut down right now for mentioning COVID in their marketing, mentioning that in their advertising. The same is true for different supplements, male enhancement products, where they have to focus on, let's say, men's hair products, and then moving them through sexual enhancement products. We've had to work on similar types of scenarios for sporting goods stores and getting blocked for mentioning firearms on their site. There's so much scrutiny, there's so much politics. And when you look at the actual utility of a startup, when you think of the classic pitch deck and what is the problem you're solving, what is the solution? I just am able to see so much value in what you're speaking about, having these past experiences, looking at the opportunity in terms of what you're solving, all on top of the faster speeds, all on top of the lower percentage processing rates, which should be enough for a retailer in any industry alone. But then being able to apply it to these verticals that are physically blocked from traditional banking systems really is the light bulb that lights off for me. There's a clear use case. And I love how you talked about the marketing partner. I know you guys also have aggressive marketing and sales processes. How are you building awareness? What have you tested? What are you doing to really get the word out there to these retailers? What are you doing to get, let's say, investors or traders, different consumers that want to engage in TUSC? How are you marketing everything as a marketing partner, with that layer of separation? What has tested and been most effective for you thus far?
So a couple things there. So we're still in the beginnings, right? So we launched really the beginning of January with our blockchain, and we knew that in our roadmap there would be several phases to go through. And it's interesting being a token first. Like, a lot of people don't understand like all the getting on exchanges and all those pieces, and so we had to repeat a lot of things. So for instance, in many ways, even though we've launched and we've grown and we've changed our team a lot over 2.5 years. But we had to relist all on new exchanges, and going through that process, especially as a non-ICO project, we're positioned pretty well. For one, we're not a legal security under US law. And so once we get to enough volume, we should be able to be traded on American exchanges. And that's kind of a big deal, because there's only probably, a couple dozen, 3-4 dozen projects that will be able to be legally transacted on an American crypto exchange, because we were not an ICO. We did not sell tokens and coins, and American exchanges can't trade illegal securities on them. And pretty much every ICO in the 2017, 2018 timeframe is an illegal security by definition. And so the exchanges, can't list those. Eventually, we will be listed on American Exchange, but it takes time. So to begin with, a couple different things that we're doing to get out there. COVID did slow some things down because we were going to be a little more aggressive, but the number one thing that we've been doing is networking. And so you and I have met through crypto conferences over the years. But I spent a lot of time going to gun related, once we decided to go to the, into the gun industry, start networking there. So I spend probably 60% of my time doing, gun related industry stuff, and then 40% crypto related. So essentially, so this is actually more complicated because we're really focused on one industry initially with our marketing time and dollars that we have, but we still have two industries that we have to address. The crypto industry is one thing, then that's, and you have to focus on that because you have to be able to develop those relationships and partnerships with payment gateway providers and things of that nature, getting on exchanges, things of that nature. So you have to spend time marketing to the crypto world. But to get the end users, you got to be over in the industry world that you want to approach. I find it's interesting, like, so where we started, I've been going to like the Gun Rights Policy Conference, and I've targeted that as one of the first conferences in the gun space that I went to, because all the media in the gun world goes to that conference. And from that, I've actually started getting on pretty big high-end gun-related kind of PR. So I'm doing a lot of earned media. As a non-ICO project, we don't have a giant bankroll sitting around in the back, $40, $50 million raise. And we're still kind of an interesting bottleneck because we don't have the liquidity yet to access some of our reserve funds to convert to fiat or Bitcoin to start paying for more traditional marketing. We're going to get there, but it's on our roadmap. So we figured the first 12, now I'm going to push that out to probably 18 months. The first, since we launched our blockchain, the first originally 12 months, we are focusing on building infrastructure. That means on and off ramps. That means things like getting on exchanges, building liquidity, and going out and getting e-commerce payment gateway plugins built. COVID slowed a lot of things down in all spaces. So right now, since we're currently traded on 5 exchanges and we're working on 3 more, we're negotiating right now. That's an ongoing thing. Just getting on more exchanges is better. We are currently working on some partnerships with some of the largest gun-related point-of-sale systems in the world. So just one of them, I'm not going to say names right now because we're developing those relationships out, but we are in talks. But one POS system might have 2,500 to 3,000 gun retailers using their software. So a TUSC integration into any one of those companies, and there's about 6 of those companies that kind of run that industry, we're going to get integrated. So we're hoping that one of those will be public and available within 6 months from about now. And I think we're on track for that. Essentially, right now we are in a beta program. So we have so far 4 retailers, and we're talking to about another dozen that are going to come on in our pilot program. And these are the first retailers that have agreed to accept TUSC. And in fact, 2 weeks ago was the first transaction for a good and service with TUSC. It happened. We don't even have a payment gateway up yet. That is being developed right now, a WooCommerce plugin. This was just a manual transaction from one wallet to another, but one of our retailers, Citizen Armor, which is a body armor company, actually had a pretty big sale that they sold body armor with TUSC. And so that was our first actual legitimate sale of a good or service for TUSC. So that was just 2 weeks ago on our kind of roadmap. We're currently building out we're basically exposing retailers in the industry to what we're doing. As far as PR goes right now, I know I got an interview scheduled this weekend with a large radio talk show. It's a regional one that has a gun-related one, and I am working on getting on a couple other major national radio shows that have a national presence in the gun space. So we're doing the PR, basically just earned media. We're not knocking doors, we're brute forcing this right now. Same with the crypto space. So it's kind of like, bouncing back and forth from one industry to another, because it's almost like chicken and egg kind of thing. So we got to have some successes over in the gun industry, and then we got to let the crypto industry know that we're doing those successes. And so it's like double duty. But we think it's important because we think that as far as crypto adoption goes, we don't know any other project out there that's focused just on one industry and just trying to hammer relationships in one industry. And our thinking was part of the Amazon approach, but there's a real functional reason for it. If you get enough retailers using your crypto, then enough after a point of time, there'll be distributors, the next link up the chain, the distributors will take TUSC, and then eventually the manufacturers will. And so what happens is you create basically a reinforcing ecosystem where it reduces friction, because then you don't have to go in and out to fiat or Bitcoin from your crypto. So the idea to us, we're like, let's just get a whole industry taking it. And I don't know of any crypto that has had success with that at all yet. So to me, that crypto last mile of crypto adoption is still wide open. And so we're focused on one industry initially. We're going to build that ecosystem, get traction, and we are in that process. And then what we're doing is we don't just view investors as users. I don't like using the word users. I think of more in terms of customers. And so we, as a project, we view the retailer as our customer. And we see how we're going to get that last mile of crypto adoption. How we're going to get that is we're essentially training and going to support retailers to onboard their customers to pay them in TUSC. And one of the incentive structures that we feel works out for them, and so far our customers agree, is that they're just going to get a discount to their customers for using TUSC. So what we're going to be doing is we're creating a toolbox for the gun retailers, which is things like basically explainer videos. So we're going to be paying to have those developed out that tells people, how do you use a wallet? How do you use TUSC? All this information stuff that these retailers can put right on their own website. And we're going to give those to them for free. We're going to hold their hand, and we're going to, over time, build out actual classes and things like that. When we're onboarding, we're figuring all this out. But again, this is a multi-year project. So we're going to provide all the education and training we need to do to, one, onboard retailers, but on two, how they onboard their customers. But the incentive structure is pretty straightforward. For the retailer, what we say is that the sales pitch is simple. And you mentioned this earlier. It's 0.5% transaction fee, no chargebacks, and then you instantly have your coins in your wallet. So it improves their cash flow. So it reduces their chargeback problem. It's cheaper on fees, so they save money. And so just the economic incentives just make sense for retail. And so that's all we need. We don't need to make it more complicated than that. But then in addition, we have, for instance, on our website at TUSC.network, we have a retailer merchant directory that we give them a free listing. When they onboard, we give them a social push, for instance, and let them know, hey, look, this organization's now using our project. They're now using our crypto. So to incentivize at least the beginning retailers, we're also giving them free marketing for their booth, or their time and effort that they're putting into onboarding. And then, so basically how we see it is manifesting to that, adoption is that the retailers they get another boost, is that built into TUSC is a single layer affiliate program. So if you sign somebody up to TUSC and you're a lifetime member of TUSC, you have your own wallet, you get a little piece of their transaction fees. And then we figure, so when a retailer incentivizes one of their customers to give them a 2% discount to buy something with TUSC, they also will give them the on-ramps. Say, okay, well, here, you got to go get some TUSC from this, for instance, an exchange. So if the retailer then sets up an affiliate account with the exchange, they get a kickback that way. And then they sign them up to TUSC, they get a kickback that way on top of that. On top of reducing their chargeback risk, getting instant cash flow improvements because they don't have to wait for the ACH from Visa or MasterCard. And then they're just saving on fees. And so to us, the long term, that's how we're going to kind of get that, close that last crypto adoption mile. And then, so in the roadmap, we're looking at probably third and fourth quarter 2021 to start making our basically retailer onboarding massive pitch. So this next 12 to 18 months that we're doing right now is we're completely focused on, setting up, improving our liquidity, getting on more exchanges, getting all the pieces, all the payment gateways for the different shopping carts and all that, get into some other bigger point of sale integrations with existing players in the industry. And then once we have more of that dialed in, then we're going to start doing actual pushes into getting retailers on board the network. So we figure we're about a year out from that.
Intricate, complex, and I love it. It sounds like you've tested out a lot to get to this point. I'll have some questions about optimizations just in a moment, but just want to highlight. So you're really setting these customers, which are the retailers, up well. It sounds like you thought of every angle and have tried to position the right value points, so it's almost a no-brainer for them to get involved. Particularly like how you pointed out, you'll have success in a given vertical, let's say it's cryptocurrency, be able to showcase that to both the customers and both sides of the table, that age-old question of how do you build a marketplace, what comes first, the chicken or the egg. So that's how you're getting on one side, then pointing at the other side of, hey, look who we got here, you should join this. I definitely understand the incentives that you're providing your customers to then provide their customers, and how that is synergistic and overall leading to growth. I guess my question goes back to the optimizations. What did it take to figure all of this out? Were there things that you attempted and didn't really get the response you were looking for out of the cryptocurrency community? Have you run into any roadblocks with exchanges? As I know that's where you're focusing this year, is getting more listings, getting more trading volume on a daily basis, and what that means for the overall community. Have there been any type of roadblocks that you've had to make pivots around your sales and marketing or the product as a whole that you've been able to work through? Anything there that you can share?
Absolutely. There's been, lots of problems and pivots. And I think one of the things a lot of entrepreneurs make, and maybe just anybody starting a business, but generally is that, especially new entrepreneurs, they'll make a plan of what they think, how something has to unfold and go. And then they don't pivot when the information or evidence suggests that they should, and then they fail because they fail to adapt. And that's a real problem. Inventors are the worst at this, by the way, because I've met a lot of inventors and the startup communities that I've been a part of, and they're very rigid. Like, I need 50% royalty, but you have no money and you can't scale this up, but I want this huge royalty. How about you get 3% and you don't have to ever look at this again, you'll be rich. But no, I want 50% ownership. It's like, okay, you can't work with that. So I'll give you a couple things that, and things are changing, but I'll tell you how we've had to adapt. So when we I'll give you one of the big problems we had to come up with when we figured out that being on Ethereum wasn't great for payments because of the congestion pricing and gas is complicated and kludgy, and the network gets spammed and then the price goes up. That was kind of like a sign to us that, this is not a great payments blockchain. Tokens are not good on Ethereum, at least with originally, because Ethereum didn't scale. And we know now, fast forward 2.5 years later, obviously we know that because Ethereum is scaling and changing, going to a proof of stake hybrid type of blockchain now because they realized it too. But one of the things that we found initially in the beginning, going back even to when we were a token, is that there was so much ICO money floating around, and people who have never managed big budgets before literally throwing money at anything without thought or regard for the return on the investment. So for instance, back in the day, since we didn't do an ICO, we're just bootstrapped. Our whole project even now is basically run by volunteers, and everybody's got a full-time day job. And so and even though my wife and I have invested a lot of money, 6 digits worth of our own personal fiat into the project to get it to where it is today, because I believe strongly in the project. There's only so much money my wife will let me spend on this. She's like, she wants her kitchen remodeled. And we've actually put that off. So, but my wife is one of our co-founders, so she believes in the project too. But in the beginning, we didn't have this money to even get on podcasts. So, for instance, I'm not going to say who it is, but it's a very famous podcast in the crypto space back then. And this someone I knew wanted to charge over $7,000 worth of ETH as the friends and family discount to just come on their podcast. And I was a little more indignant about it because I'm like, we're friends, right? But ultimately, getting on podcasts, especially in the beginning with crypto podcasts and stuff, it was all pay to play. Mm-hmm. And part of that was driven by the fact of all this loose ICO money going around and people throwing stupid amount of money at things. That was ridiculous. The other thing that we saw that's been a big impediment to that. All right. So what I did about that is I started my own podcast. So that's why I started the Rob McNealy program, is not because I wanted to monetize. In fact, I was pissed off a little bit and just annoyed that people were charging astronomical prices for podcasts that might not even be that big. They might have like 5,000 subscribers or something. They want like $5,000 to come on. It was just, in my mind, ridiculous. In part because I think in terms of a marketer, I'm like, there's no ROI on that. It's like, if I spend $5,000 on, programmatic, I'm going to get probably more traction than if I, give this guy $5,000. But people were paying it so they could charge it. Now I think fast forward, that's changed a lot, but then I started, I used to do a small business radio show in Denver, and I did podcasting like 10 years ago. So I felt, look, why don't I just start podcasting myself, and I won't charge anybody to come on my show. And then there's a lot of projects out there that might be a pretty good project to talk to, and they're in the same boat we are. And so they may not have money. So, and it's funny because as a podcaster now, and I still do probably one show a week, and I don't charge, never have. I have no problem getting anybody on my show that I want to have come on the show for the same reason. I was right. But I found doing that podcast has actually helped propel me in the networking side of things in the crypto space, because now I'm able to talk to people for that same reason, because I'm not charging. I'm able to get on some talk to some really big people and important people. And that in turn actually has helped elevate TUSC. So that was one pivot that we had to deal with. So another problem in how we kind of overcame with when we decided to do our own blockchain, we really only had a front end guy and one hardcore back programmer, and they both bailed. They didn't want to do the work of building a blockchain. So when we were a token, we were at a decision point, and they're not bad guys, they had other things they wanted to do. They had other commitments. They didn't have the time to build it out. And it was interesting because my wife and I had, at that point, we actually had more volume then at that time than we do even now. And we could have walked away with a lot of money in our pocket if we would have just sold our coins and walked away from the project. And my wife was actually like, you know what? We don't have a team anymore. We can't program this. What do? We should just probably bail. And I had an ethical issue with that. And I said, look, we gave it away. And this is my wife said, like, look, we didn't charge anybody for this, but I felt bad because people had bought them on exchanges. And they did buy them because we were available as a team and we were telling people we're going to work on this. And based on that information, they did make an investment in the project. And I felt guilty about that, walking away. And so ultimately, we had a decision to make, and my wife and I had a really come to Jesus conversation. And my wife said this, she's like, if you can pull a new team together and figure that part out, I'll support building this into another blockchain and going through that and not bailing. And I said, challenge accepted. And so I spent several months networking, even called everybody I knew, new developers. I put out a bounty. If you can, $500 to some of my friends. I said, if you can get a developer that would work for the, basically a small share of tokens that we had available at the time, and that'll come onto the blockchain, I'll give you $500. And lo and behold, it worked. Between the networking and some of the bounties, we built a whole new team. Yeah. And we're able to then work on this whole process. We spent more than a year with that new team kind of going through that whole diligence process and talking to end users process and doing our requirements gathering and trying to sort out how to manage this project and how to grow a decentralized project in a way. And we looked at all the problems some other, decentralized projects were having with governance, and we tried to, deal with those and mitigate that the best we could and try to figure out what the problems were going to be. So that was another problem we dealt with. And so that's how we dealt with it, and I can tell you it was a lot of work, just trying to do that. Another problem that we overcame is block producers. So in our network, we don't have miners, we have block producers, and they have to still set up a server and run the network. So how do you incentivize and recruit your initial block producers to be willing to set up a server and support the network? And how do you do that? So that was another problem we had to do. And ultimately, I spent a lot of networking time and literally trying to connect with people that were IT related kind of people that also through the gun world. So I went to some of the gun world and then tried to find people that worked in IT but also had an interest in guns, and then tried to attract them to the project. And so that was a whole process. It took months just to find the block producer candidates. Now we have a full deck. We have 21 validating nodes at any one time, and we have 79 backups. And so one of the things that we did, unlike other blockchains, we also incentivize our backup network. So it's a very tiny amount, but we have 79 backup nodes that if one of those 21 goes down, it's self-healing. Basically, if one of those main nodes goes down, there can be a vote held at any time, and then we can replace them with another backup node. And we pay those backup nodes too. It's just enough to keep the lights on, so to speak. But we have over 100 nodes and backup nodes, supporting the TUSC network now. So that was a whole process to go through that and try to recruit all those. And again, it literally was like taking people to lunch. It was literally just calling people that I knew and reaching out to people. And I talked to a person in the gun space and I might interview them. And then I say, who do you know that's into IT in the world of guns? And then, doing that whole process. And so I would call that basically it's business development. But we had to go through a lot of that just to get that network, so that when we decided to turn the network on, I think we turned the network formally on in October, maybe the end of September last year, then, because you had to run the network to do the swap and a bunch of other stuff. So that was another fun thing to kind of learn how to do and to kind of scale around that. Man, I could talk all day. Lots of little problems that you have to figure out. Even with the decentralized open source project, there's just these kind of things. Somebody has to do that. Somebody has to make that phone call. Someone has to go have lunch with 25,000 people.
I've seen you do it. And it all comes down to execution. And not only at these conferences do you appear to me as the smartest guy in the room in many of these, after parties or work outside the workshops or wherever it may be, but that commitment, I always use this word, that grit that I recognize in different entrepreneurs. And you've been in different verticals in the past. You've been able to see what worked, what didn't work, and really that hitting those milestones makes all the difference. So by using, in some cases, creative financing for team building, business development, and overall resiliency to making it work no matter what, because of this community you built and delivering upon that brand promise, even though it's decentralized, that still exists. The brand promise to that audience has made all the difference here, and why you are surviving as an organization and growing at that in comparison to so many other groups that, dating back to 2017, 2018 are no longer around with us. To me, that's been a key differentiating factor when I look at your path and when I look at, the overall growth of TUSC.
Well, thank you. One of the other things that we've done, and this is something I learned from the startup space, and I learned this trick years ago, is building a board of advisors. And this is really critical when you're going into industries you're unfamiliar with. And now I've done this in my entrepreneurial past multiple times now, and it's been very effective. And we did this with TUSC. So we do have advisors, but we have advisors both from the crypto space and the gun space now. And so and this is intentional. So here's a little trick I learned as an entrepreneur. Now this applies to things outside of crypto too. If you're going to go into a startup in an industry that you have no background in, what I have found, you set up a board of advisors and you incentivize the board of advisors. And it's really simple. And this is a trick I learned from somebody else. I didn't create this, but I've used this now for about 15 years and it seems to work. So let's just say I was going to go into an industry I was unfamiliar with. You want to go find the most connected person in that industry that you can find, and then get them on board as an advisor. And this is how you incentivize them. And if you're a startup, and this is a really cheap way to do it too. You call Mr. So-and-so, and I've used LinkedIn for this. So if I want to go into an industry I don't know, I go to LinkedIn and I start connecting with people that maybe were involved with that industry's trade association. So I like to start there, because the presidents of a trade association, and lots of industries might have 1 or 2 or 3 major trade associations governing them. Go to those trade associations and find out who the past presidents of those trade associations are. Start with those people. Look them up on LinkedIn, connect with them on LinkedIn. Then you try to get a phone call with them. They won't all come back to you, but if they're retired, maybe they're, like I said, they're the past president, they're going to have more time. Current presidents are good too, but they're busier. So I always like to try to find the last past president, and most of the time the trade association website has them on the website. Identify those people, connect with them on LinkedIn, reach out to them. And this has worked. And I go to, dear Mr. So-and-so, I'll get a phone call with them and say, look, this is what I'm doing. This is my project. I would like to have you be on my board of advisors. I can never pay you what you're worth, but would you accept a token of $100 an hour for your time? I only need 4 hours or 1 hour a quarter of your time. 4 hours a year, $100 an hour. I've never had someone say no to that because it plays on their ego and you get them involved. And they're like, okay, I don't know what this is, but great. And then don't bother them. I then follow up with a memo of understanding. So it's formalized of what basically just reiterate. This is the deal, 1 pager, 1 hour a quarter. This is what you do. You agree to this. I want you to commit to 12 months. So 4 hours, I will pay you over the time. In this case, we paid them in TUSC, we don't have the $100 an hour, but we paid them in a nice chunk for TUSC of like, you're going to be an advisor. You get an advisor payment. And what this does is a couple things. So for instance, I'll give you a great example. One of our advisors from the gun space didn't know anything about crypto. And I had to have multiple conversations with him just to kind of educate him about crypto. But once he got it, he got it. He's like, holy crap. And then coming to find out, he just happened to be a VP of operations for Coinstar. So we're working some things because of that. I didn't know that at the time. But here's the thing. So SHOT Show is the biggest gun show in the world. And it's in Vegas every year. And it's really hard to get into, like really selective. And they spend a lot of time. It's not open to the public. It's a business to business thing. And you have to meet all sorts of requirements. And this last year was the first time, that was in January. And so they denied us. They wouldn't let us come. They wouldn't even let us attend, not let alone have a booth, right? I picked up the phone call because one of our advisors actually kind of works with the agency that puts on the trade show. I made one phone call. He called me back. He's like, try again. And we got in. So our advisor, so that 1 hour, that 1 hour a quarter, and I didn't even bother him for like a year because I didn't need anything from him. But I made one, but I came updates. I sent him emails every now and then, just tell him what we're doing. But I made that one phone call, and then subsequently at that SHOT Show this year, he personally walked me around, introduced me to the current president of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which puts on the SHOT Show, and other experts and top people because he knows everybody. So this is another one of those scale optimized kind of things, right? It's a hack, but I'm telling you, don't just like I see this a lot of mistakes that entrepreneurs make, and crypto people probably do too, is they'll just get an advisor who's like some retired banker, right? And you're like, well, there's a manufacturing business making widgets, but we got a banker on our board. That guy's not going to help you with anything. Go find people that you think could help you, introduce you to who the industry. And I like people that are involved in the main shooting sports, trade associations and things of that nature. And it might take you 1 or 2 tries, but you don't need many of those guys because they know everybody. Everybody knows them. Mm-hmm. And so that was another pivot that we had to do, but that's a great example of how I was able then to really leverage one of our advisors in a key way. And I didn't bother him. I meet him at the trade show. He gave me, we had coffee a couple of times, but I spent most of my time doing my own thing, but he got me in the door. Literally got me in the door and made some really good introductions to me, which I then followed up on. And I think that setting up a good board of advisors, even for a crypto project, is important. One of our advisors is Tron Black, the lead dev of Ravencoin. He was critical, and he was probably one of the first advisors we have. Now, I knew Tron previously because we're in the same town from meetups and stuff, but he was really instrumental in talking about some of the technological stuff. And when we were picking blockchains, that's where we really leverage Tron, is that look, if I have a really complicated question that I don't know because I'm not a developer, but we have to make critical, technological decisions. He would be one of the go-to guys. We have another guy named Trent Larson who also works for Medici Ventures, which is a part of Overstock's, cryptocurrency venture capital firm. He's one of their leads over there. He's another one of our advisors. And so if I have another, so I also like to bounce tech questions back and forth between different tech people that I think are trustworthy and because they've executed on big projects in this space. So but always do a board of advisors.
Yep.
And that's a good way to help overcome and get through certain problems.
So we look for growth hacks here, actionable insights. I think that goes above and beyond there. We talk about strategic partnership outreach on LinkedIn regularly. You could send 100 invites per day on LinkedIn, anticipate a 20% acceptance rate of those invites. So like you said, you're not going to hear back from everybody, let alone even be able to connect to everyone on LinkedIn by doing so. But you could get a 10 to 20% response rate from those new LinkedIn connections, which you think of a 2% response rate over email, it's exponentially different. And what a great way to point when you said trade show association, trading association. I know we've found a lot of success there in terms of partnerships with cryptocurrency and blockchain conferences. It seemed like there was one every day for a couple years there, and have been in those type of shows globally at this point in various verticals, marketing, tech, entrepreneurship, software as a service, SaaS, you name it. There's a conference, digital conference now, which can be even easier to work, but happening digitally today. So being able to, really put yourself to good use there, seek those guys out, have some type of messaging, want to emphasize the follow-up. It's all in the follow-up, but to be able to scale what you're doing and being able to identify the value you're getting from partnerships and now doing it in very intentional fashion with the firearm conferences, with trade associations as a whole. The last serving president of a trade association, I can definitely get behind that. I'm gonna have my team set up to do some of that outreach today. It sounds like you've been able to put together a lot of great relationships in the process, and even watch them come to life there. So what a great recommendation and something to add to the conversation here. Where do you see everything going? Where do you see TUSC in 5 years, 10 years? Where do you see cryptocurrency? I'm not going to ask for your Bitcoin, valuation guess or anything like that, but just overall, where do you see things going? If any listeners are trying to figure out where to position themselves or their own organizations, what does the future hold during COVID, post-COVID, in a post-COVID world? What does your industry and overall the business landscape look like over the next 5 to 10 years to come?
Wow. Oh, that's a whole lot of things. So economy, let's look at COVID, a couple of things that I see happening and how that may affect our industry. So one, I think that the US dollar is toast. I just don't know when, but you can't print this much money and not have at least some kind of inflation, or at some point the inflation leads to, a dollar crisis where people are concerned about it. There'll probably be some kind of reset at that point, and I don't know what that looks like. It's historic from the standpoint that we've never had to go through that. It could be a devaluation. It could just be, it could be a lot of things, but we've seen with banana republic kind of countries like Venezuela and and I don't mean this in the worst case scenario, but you look at like Venezuela and some of these third world, second world kind of countries where they have a currency crisis almost every decade. Okay. The people there they're just kind of used to it, but they have a fallback, the US dollar, right? If you look at these, when those countries go down, like the Venezuelan peso or whatever, they just go to dollars. So there's already a secondary infrastructure there. What I've told people is that, and I think we saw this with, the economic crisis right now, crypto is not correlated and does not go up when the economy goes down, because right now, and how I look at it is no one is gonna go through and hold a high risk investment in a down economy. And we know this because when, at least in 2007, 2008, what typically do is they leave high risk investments to safer investments. And I don't believe that crypto is going to be the default, gold or hedge until someone's using it for buying and selling goods and services and it's commonplace or mass adopted. So I believe until a crypto gets mass adopted, most cryptos are going to be considered high risk speculative investments. And when the economies tank, they're going to be tanking along with that. That's my belief. And we did see this recently when the stock market crashed, Bitcoin crashed with it. And I believe that's going to happen until there's mass adoption somewhere. I also believe that, again, I don't want to put a timeline on this, but the first cryptos to get mass adoption, meaning it could be us, it could be somebody else, I don't know who it'll be, but the first cryptos to win are going to be the ones that get mass adoption. But those cryptos, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a big upset. So whatever crypto basically gets people buying and selling goods and services with that crypto. I'm talking more on the payment side, not necessarily the DeFi side or, smart contract side, but whatever crypto is actually getting people at the retail level buying something with their crypto on a regular basis. Whenever that happens, I believe it's going to do a massive shakeup to the crypto industry, because I think it's going to change the way people evaluate the value of crypto projects. So let's just say you're a top 10 crypto now that's for payments. Like, not going to pick names because very tribal. But even if you're a top 10 for trading and some other project now actually is getting mass adopted and provable, where people are, wow, there's, this many billions of dollars in transactions going through the network a year or whatever, and it's provable that you can see that, it's going to shift the way people value the projects that are not. And I think people are going to question that value. And I think that'll happen very quickly once that's proven. Again, I don't know who that's going to be. I don't know when that's going to happen, but it's going to happen. Because right now, if you look at the top 30, 40 crypto projects out there, most of them are invested, and most people invest in them because of the potential of those projects is higher. The more mature your project is, the more liquidity you have, the more likely you're going to be successful. But ultimately, if they don't achieve mass adoption or get usefulness and get customers, and someone, so that's a lesser project or smaller project, does because they did something different, it's going to upset that. And so I think that will happen, whether it's TUSC or another project, I don't know, but it's going to happen because there's too many, I would say, overvalued projects in crypto, in my opinion. And I say that not because I dislike the projects or dislike the teams. It's just they're not focused on getting actual users to use it in the end. They're speculative assets. And I do believe that there's some large projects out there that made so much money. The developers made so much money on their early ICOs, the ones that are even legal ICOs, and they made so much money. I think they rest on their laurels. I think they just made their money and they're not that hungry. When you've made millions and millions of dollars, you don't have to work 80 hours a week anymore if you don't want to. So I do think that whatever crypto gets mass adoption first, or gets some adoption first, even if it's, I would even call it niche adoption. Like if we're adopted in the gun industry, I would say that's still niche adoption. That's not mass adoption, but that's the start to mass adoption. That's going to change the way projects get evaluated. So I think there'll be a big upset in that top 100 slots of crypto projects whenever that happens. So as far as politics and stuff go right now, I don't know what's going to happen with the regulatory stuff and the digital dollar. I think it depends on where the projects are when that lands and what that looks like. If you think about it, I think if the U.S. government comes out with a digital dollar, I think that'll probably be the ultimate stable coin, right? So, and that'll probably be, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the go-to stable coin. And in some ways, if the government decides to play ball in the crypto world, I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think if they come in and say, you have to use this and nothing else, that could be really bad. And that's always a possibility too. But I think what will happen is that'll crash a bunch of, the tethers of the world. If the U.S. comes in and just basically launches a competing stable coin, essentially, I think that will hurt like Dollar Tether and some of the other stable, coins that are run by a black box with people. We don't really know what they're doing. So I think that's likely to happen. I don't know how far that goes as far as regulation. If the government tries to stamp out competition, that could be a different animal. But I think that'll happen. industry stuff. So we've seen right now, basically every day is Christmas in the gun world right now. So the civil unrest that's happening, the protests that have been happening, the marches, the burnings, the lootings, that has scared a lot of people in the United States right now, and they're arming. So last time I looked, they've sold somewhere between 8.5 and 9 million guns at the time we're doing this in the last 3 months. There is basically no guns to be had in a lot of gun stores. There's almost no ammunition in most gun stores right now. They've sold basically every day is like Black Friday in the gun world. The gun stores have like no inventory right now. It's crazy. And so people are buying guns left and right now. And so as far as the industry goes, that's actually a good thing, because there was this thing called the Trump slump that happened. So people buy guns, especially conservatives, when they're concerned about losing gun rights, or they're concerned about civil unrest and things of that nature, or when the economy is looking bad. That's when people arm up. So typically what happens is when a conservative gets in office and becomes president, then people stop buying guns. So I think in the last 5 years of the Obama administration, you couldn't get like certain calibers of ammo at all for like 5 years. Just didn't exist. People bought everything. As soon as it was put on the shelf, people bought it. Then Trump came into office, and then all the gun and ammo sales slowed down, because when people thought when a conservative's in office, they don't fear gun rights being taken away, they stopped buying. And so they called it the Trump slump, and that's now been reversed over the last, probably heavily over the last 6 to 9 months. And so the industry right now is doing really, really well. So I think, where it goes going forward, I don't know. I have some concerns about supply chain and what that might look like in 2021 as far as, disruptions. We're already seeing disruptions in supply chain now across a lot of different industries. If those get more pervasive and or affect the food supply chain more, I expect that more people are going to arm up. And if we, it's a one thing if you can't get some kind of consumer good or service, people just go, we have a lot of options, right? I think when people get really scared and get concerned, and this affects both the buying of guns and alternative cryptos, maybe like gold or alternative currencies, like maybe precious metals. If food starts getting disrupted and unavailable, that's going to scare people immensely. And we'll have to see what the numbers look like on the fall harvest this year before we make the determination that there's a concern there. But I think if the COVID-related absenteeism affects food logistics and food supply chains, I would see that there'll probably be a big uptick for more guns and ammo in the spring, winter time next year, as well as probably people looking at alternative currencies. Then I think also we're going to probably start seeing inflation in the next couple of years, and that'll also maybe be good for crypto.
Hard to say if that paints a bright picture or not, but definitely opportunities for growth in the coming months, coming years. You definitely have your fingers on the pulse and positioning TUSC accordingly. And I think that's what it comes down to in terms of good business management, good marketing as a whole. Hard not to, it's hard not to interrupt too much while you're talking. It's so rich with information.
Oh, jump in, man. I talk too much.
No. saying it as a compliment, in the sense that, I could see everything that goes into TUSC, the development to where you guys are at thus far, positioning within crypto, positioning within the 7 verticals where you guys are solving payment processing and where things can ultimately go from there. So, imagine we're gonna get some good responses from the audience here, and actually want to make you available for communications as well too. If anyone listening in right now wants to get hold of you, Rob, what is the best way for them to do so? What is your preferred method of communication?
Oh, you can just hit me up at robmcnealy.com. I'm also pretty active on Twitter, and it's just at Rob McNealy. And so I'm easy to find. So robmcnealy.com, at Rob McNealy on Twitter. If you just type in Rob McNealy, you can find all my socials. They're everywhere. Okay. And, being able to go to TUSC.network, getting a better idea for everything you have going on there, being directed to different points where they can actually trade as well. Is that the best place for them to do more research for TUSC? Absolutely. And there's definitely the links to all their communities and all our socials and all the exchanges that we're on is all right on TUSC.network. We have a pretty active Telegram group as well, so jump in there anytime. But yeah, hit me up. I mean, I'm always easy to get a hold of. I'm on Twitter or Telegram pretty much 24/7. So we've been very available as a team. We have at least 3 co-founders that are in the Telegram group every day. And so we kind of monitor that all the time. We're really easy to get a hold of. And I think that's why the community supported us this long 2.5 years. We're still very consistent and very accessible.
Very nice. Awesome stuff, Rob. Thank you for being on today. Again, from a marketing perspective, we definitely applaud everything you're doing and are excited to see the next steps. So it was an honor to have you on today, and we'll be rooting you on as things move forward here.
Well, Jason, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this time today, and I really appreciate all the insights that you have and the value that you do create for people in your network and your customers for sure.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. Take care, everyone.